Hello, this is the Granulator mode on the Disting EX. This is an audio processing effect. It is an instrument and it is a hybrid of the two. So there's quite a lot to cover. So this will be the first of several videos probably, but bear with me. So it's a granulator. Basically you have an audio buffer, you record audio into the buffer, or you load audio into the buffer from the SD card, and then you play grains being short bursts of sound, which are regularly or randomly generated in some fashion, and that is what you hear. So the basic connections are stereo audio in, stereo audio out, unless you're just using it as an instrument, in which case you don't need the input, but we'll come to that. So for the purposes of the demo, I'm using a MIDI keyboard and a MIDI editor. This is largely so it's easier for you to see what I'm up to, but you can of course control everything through the module's own UI or through CV if you wish, but like I said, just for the purposes of the convenience of a demo, I'll be doing this through MIDI. So, like I say, it doesn't really do anything until you give it some audio in one form or another. So I've got some audio coming here from the Rene controlling a general CV, which sounds like this. And let's, without further ado, record something. So this has a special visualization mode. If you double click V, you see this, which is the audio buffer. I'm going to make it a little bit shorter and I'm going to record some stuff. There we go, that'll do. And then I'll stop the input. Right, so now we have some audio, we can play some grains. So grains are controlled by notes, which can either be notes like so, or they can be what's called drones. Now drones are what you'll want to use if you're just using that as an effect without any kind of control. It's basically the same as just holding your finger down on the keyboard forever without having to do that. So if I enable one of the drones, it just starts playing grains like so. So just to skip over, well, to go back to some basics that I skipped over. In common with the poly wavetable and SD multisample modes, there's an input mode parameter which specifies how many CV gate pairs you want to use for sending notes. If you're just using it as an audio effect, you might put that to 0, so you've got 6 inputs for CV control. If you want to play 3-note chords through CV gate, then you'll put that up to 3, or somewhere in between. The default is 1, I'll leave that there. Also the mono input parameter, by default it's stereo. If you've just got a mono signal you want to process and then free up the other input for CV control, you can activate mono input, but this is actually a stereo input, so I'll leave it like that for now. And then another couple of kind of setup things for which input uses the delay CV and the output delay routing, but I'll leave all that as it is for now. And we'll go back to exploring some of the fundamental granular synthesizer parameters. So let's re-enable our drone. Where's it gone? There we go. So this is basically just playing little snippets out of the audio buffer. If you look in the display, there's little dots. Each dot represents the play position of a grain at that time. So a grain is defined by where it is in the buffer, how long it plays for, the pitch it plays at, and its pan position, and the shape of the envelope of the grain. And if you combine lots of things with those different parameters, you end up with this kind of granular sound. So this knob by default is controlling the position in the buffer, but you can remount that if you like. So if you remember while I recorded, it was kind of bing bong sound, 2 chords. So as I scan from one to the other, I get elements of the two different chords. That's got a CV control mapped by default into this input. If I give it a CV, then I can give it a CV from the Tirana here. And you control the same thing, so you can do what you like with that, but I'll stick with MIDI for now. So, like I say, these are your basic grain parameters here in the editor. Each of them has a mean and a spread. So a mean is the kind of average value that it's going to be centered around, and then the spread is the amount of randomness about that position that you're going to have. So if the spread is 0, then it's going to use the same value all the time. If the spread goes up, then it's going to be more random. So at the moment we've got grains being spawned quite often. They're about 100 milliseconds long. They're playing at the normal pitch. They're kind of center panned, and they're using about a 50% position in the buffer. So let's just go through these one at a time and see how they change the sound. So rate, that's how often it's making grains spawn. So if we slow that down, obviously once the rate becomes comparable or more than the size, then you're going to end up with gaps. That's not terribly random. If we increase the randomness, you can hear the time between the grains becomes more random. So let's put that back down. The size, as we make that longer, you can see quite clearly each grain now covers a lot more of the buffer and is playing a more recognizable section at the rate. So that's almost playing the whole sample there at a time. And again, size can be randomized. Pitch, obviously you can pitch it up and down. In semitones, you can also randomize the pitch. So if you just give it a few cents of randomness, you're going to end up with a kind of chorusing kind of sound. If you wind it up, it's going to become more and more chaotic. Less useful, but it's there if you need it. Let's not do that. So that's the pitch. The pan, that's the stereo position. So at the moment it's mostly stereo, mostly in the middle. Pan it, one side or the other. And if you give it some randomness, then you end up with a nice kind of diffuse stereo cloud, which is rather nice. And then delay. So delay is the same as this thing and the CV I gave it. It's called delay rather than sort of buffer position or whatever, because once you actually have this running as an audio effect, it is actually the delay time between the sound going in and it being played back. So that's the reason for that naming, and that you can see moves the thing around. And if you give that some randomness, then it's going to play grains from all over the buffer rather than just from the one place. There we go. And then the grain shape is another very basic property of the grain. That is the shape of one grain over time. So Gaussian is your standard bell curve shape. It starts at 0, goes up to a lump in the middle, and then down again. Tukey is similar to that, but spends more time at full volume, so it's a kind of louder sound. Triangle is the opposite, it's just a linear ramp up and down. It tends to be a little bit quieter. Expedite is short for exponential decay, so this is an almost instant attack and then a kind of an exponential decay. There we go. So you can hear each individual grain is a sharp kind of hit now. And Expedite is the opposite, it's a reverse exponential. So it gives you that kind of reverse sound. And the last option is equal power, which sounds like that. That has a very specific application which I'll come back to later, or possibly even in a different video, so hold on for that one. Let's go back to the normal kind of washy sounds that we like. Okay, so that's your basic grain parameters. The next one I want to talk about is this opacity thing. Now the grains have their own opacity controls, so we'll skip down to here. So opacity basically randomly prevents grains from playing. So if you imagine the grains is this kind of big washy cloud of sound, then opacity breaks down that dense fog into a kind of a mist so that you can see gaps through it. So basically it's just knocking grains out, which by itself isn't much different from changing the rate, but once you've got two drones going at the same time, then it gives you a different way to balance them up. The other one being level, so let's backtrack. Drone level. So this is basically just the volume. You turn it down, you turn it up. And then if you've got multiple drones going on, it balances the two the subclouds. But if you change the opacity, then each grain from the cloud is staying the same level, but you're just getting more or less grains from one drone over the other. So if you kind of crossfade two opacities, you're kind of having one cloud giving way to the other, rather than just crossfading in volume terms. So it's just a different kind of sound. And this is a useful time to talk about envelopes as well, because turn the grain off. The drones use the same envelopes as when you're playing from a keyboard. So normal business, when you press the note, you get an envelope attack up, and there's a release when you release it. So let's make those slightly longer. Attack and release time are controlled here. So by default, the envelope controls the opacity. So as it fades up, the grains are going to become more dense up to maximum and then become less dense. Like so. If we change the envelope to opacity control to 0 and put the envelope to level control up, then that's a more normal kind of volume envelope. Like so. So like I say, it's just a matter of how you want the envelopes to control things. Volume envelopes you can do with other forms of synthesis. Opacity envelopes, not so much. So different things to play with. These can go pretty long as well. So if I put the release time up and release the drone, it's still releasing. There we go. Okay, so now I promised I was going to talk about audio processing, and so far I've just had the thing sat there with a static buffer. So let's re-enable recording. And because there's nothing going in, everything goes away, obviously, because silence is going in. And then we'll re-enable our input sequence. So now we've got our sounds going in, and then you've kind of an echo coming from the grains playing it back. If we make this buffer size a bit longer, then it'll be a bit slower. And let's enable our higher pitch drone, and then it'll be more obvious which of the drones, because they'll be an octave up. I should mention this actually while I'm here. The drone pitches are completely controllable. They default to kind of an octave down and up from the normal, but you can change that however you like. And then the natural pitch control defines what is considered normal. So by default it's C4. So if you play C, you'll get the pitch the sample came in at. If you know your sample or whatever you've recorded into the buffer is an A, say, then you could change that to the MIDI note for an A. And then when you play A, you'll get the same pitch back as you put into it. But it's like this for now. So now we've got this processing live audio, the meaning of the delay control is a bit more obvious, because it put that down, then the grains follow more quickly after the actual sound. Or at the other extreme. And then of course you can put the spread up and it's playing back all kinds of stuff at the same time. What else should we play with? Let's have a couple of drones going. There we go. Right, now there are other things that are very relevant to live processing of audio. I'm just going to put the delay down, the delay spread down so that it's more of a recognisable delay. There are three different kind of delay echo feedback paths here, and two of them are here. So input feedback is applying a feedback to the input buffer, basically treating this audio buffer as a delay by itself, and then feeding back round as every time it loops. So if I put that up, in fact what I'll do just to demo that, let's stop this. Right, so that's nothing there now. So if I put the input feedback way up, and I'll just let it play a couple of notes in. Stop the input. So there's no input coming in now, but the input audio that's already in the buffer is now repeating round in the delay way, because I've got this input feedback up. Yeah, so that's maybe clear or maybe not, I don't know. And then the main feedback, this applies the output of the granulator, that records the output of the granulator back into the buffer as well. So now it really is a delay. So if I turn that up, then what you'll hear is the higher octave grain output going back into the buffer and being repeated as well. So that's giving us a nice shimmer thing. Because it's pitch shifted every time it goes round the granulator now, it's going higher and higher and higher. And if I put the input signal back in and combine, put the input feedback back down. Let's make the delay a bit shorter. No, that's the wrong one. What do I mean to change? That's the one I meant to change. There we go. So now this is your classic granulator delay. Every time it goes round, it's being granulated, pitch shifted, and generally smeared. And now might be a good time to mention the mix controls here. Dry gain and effect gain. So dry gain is the level of the input signal in the output. You turn that down, you've just got the granulator output. It goes a bit longer. And then if we put the dry gain back up, then that's the output of the granulator there. And then on top of all this stuff, we've got another delay echo thing here, which is the output delay. This is a basic echo. In fact, it's exactly the same echo effect as the one in the poly wavetable algorithm, which is just applied on top of everything else at the end. So there's two routings for this. One of them, that's here. One of them is post granulator, so the final echo applies only to the granulator, and the other option is post mix, so it applies the echo to everything, including the input. So let's try post mix, and then we'll turn on the delay. Nice big long echo on top of everything, smushing it all into a big load of loveliness. So I'll just stop the input. So that's echoing on in a kind of interesting way. So yeah, that's your kind of granulator live processing thing going on. I'm going to pause there, regroup, and then we'll talk about something else in a minute.